Hey, this is Ross Payton with Role Playing Public Radio. This is RPPR episode 153, History's Mysteries. This is about using history in role-playing games, of using history as a setting, incorporating historical elements into other games, blending fact and fiction. This is obviously inspired by our recent run of the Reign of Terror, a Call of Cthulhu scenario put out by Chaosium, set during the French Revolution, and it made me think about like, hey, what's good to use in history? What's not good? Like, so I have special guests because they're not often on the show, Bridget and Thad. And so say hello.
Hello, I'm Bridget. I don't think I've ever actually been on a main RPPR show. I think I've just been on the actual plays.
And our Patreon episodes, Don't Cross the Stream and After Hours and some things like that.
I've ran a couple Shadowrun games.
Yep.
Thank you everyone who came out and enjoyed those.
And then of course Thad.
Yes, I have been here before. I think once, twice, just once, maybe. I don't know.
But before we get into that and all that fascinating discussion, we do have a bit of news. First off, if you haven't checked the actual play site in a while, we've put out a new video of us playing Puppet Land with puppets. So that was a fun thing to do for April 1. So check that out. Also,
yeah, they're good puppets. Like I used the Caleb puppet profusely at the Gen Con meetup last year.
We'll do more videos of them. People seem to really like that. It's just a matter of figuring out easier ways to record them. And then let's hear. Also, Aaron is back doing Railery on Twitch, and fortunately, he should be. If you so subscribe to that, so you can find out when he's doing it. Also, he should be saving his streams. He's going to Shadow of the Colossus, last I heard. So that should be fun. But the big news,
I would love to do stream stuff, but I would want to stream like garbage PS2 games. All this high tech stuff is meh.
Well, talk to me after the show. Maybe we can work something out. But the big news is, of course, Bridget has launched her own Patreon. And Bridget, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I started my own Patreon a couple months ago, and it seems to be fairly, I don't know if I want to say popular, but interesting. I do a lot of work on my own games that don't make it, or at least not yet, haven't made it into any of the actual plays for RPPR. So right now I'm working on an idea for a system that's about speedrunning dungeons. So I have a podcast that's chronicling my attempts to make that. So if you had a good time with something like the Red Market's design phase that Caleb went through, like we're doing a similar thing. If you want to check that out. The other thing I do is, if you've listened to Don't Cross the Streams, I make a lot of like micro games or extra mechanics. So if you check out my Patreon, you can see those PDFs, stuff I've made for that, and then other similar content. I have some ideas for some like Dungeons and Dragons, like character races and character classes that I would like to put up soon. Also, all of the Shadowrun games and things like that I've done for RPPR, I'm writing up into nice, neat PDFs. So if you want to run those games for your friends, those would be free to everybody. But obviously, if you like it, please subscribe.
And I was a guest on your podcast, and it was called, Comfy Cuties Cast.
Comfy Cuties, episode 2.
Which is a great name for a podcast.
That is solid title work.
It is solid title work. And the alliteration is A+. Bridget does really great work just with the flavor text. Like the flavor text alone of some of the Shadowrun scenarios is worth the backing, supporting her on Patreon. And you also get if you back her Patreon, you get a special desktop wallpaper of her banner art of the. Are they just original characters, or do you have anything about those?
Yeah. So my Patreon is Magical Girl themed. If you go and look at it. If you get onto my Patreon, you'll see that big banner there. It's a bunch of like D&D, like fantasy races dressed up as magical girls. And if you think that's cool, if you back my Patreon, we have a couple wallpaper sizes for those for you to use on your desktop.
So anyways, it's very cool stuff. Help support a new game designer, and so anyways, let's get into the podcast. So let's talk about history. So the genesis of this episode wasn't just the Reign of Terror, which is a well-written scenario and seems to have some pretty good historical backing. There's several. There's a good amount of the book is about the background of the French Revolution.
That was one of the things that was one of the things I was most curious about when because I listened to the actual play just I think yesterday, and I was kind of curious as to what the book would look like before I actually got a chance to see through. There's a lot of good flavor text and background notes and sort of scene setting. Yeah.
There's it's not just about the French Revolution overall, but also life in Paris. The player characters are soldiers, and there's a whole page of just what it's like to be a soldier in 1789 in Paris and that kind of thing. And I read through all that, but then an RPPR listener, a very helpful one, messaged me. He's like, "Oh, if you have any other questions, if you want more information about the French Revolution, I would be happy to answer any of your questions or anything like that." And to be honest, I was like, well, this whole book is a lot of information, and it's already integrated in the scenario, and I kind of don't want to add more information to that because
Ross doesn't do homework.
I am kind of lazy. But two, also I didn't want to, I've made the joke before that the games that Adam Scott Glancy runs could count as college
that
credit.
Was it. Yeah, Glancy was exactly who popped in my head when you said what we were talking about today.
I need 2 more credits for summer quarter. So if Glancy is running a game.
Yeah, I'll see if he can. I bet you can get you can join his class. They're usually booked full though.
Actually, I gotta say though, the thing that made me really respect the Reign of Terror book was the first thing that I always look for in almost any book that I read, because academia has broken me, is a bibliography. And this book has a hell of a bibliography. It has an annotated bibliography in a goddamn RPG book. And that just makes me pleased as punch.
Well, Chaosium is pretty... Well, I think recently they've been trying to be pretty good about the historical background. Call of Cthulhu scenarios in general tend to be way closer to academic, way closer to Glancy is not an aberration in the Call of Cthulhu writing style.
He's a creature of the system.
He's at one end of the spectrum, but he's not there are other writers pretty close up there. Glancy's games are still playable and they're quite fun, but if you and I've seen games that were even farther, more extreme than Glancy's, than what he has written, what he has done, and those get, there's a certain the question is for me, it's at what point
if you can't speak this period of French, you can't play the game.
Well, at what level do you bury your players in historical detail versus having a playable game? And then there's always the fact that no matter how much research you do, you're going to have blind spots. And then there's the question, of course, of is this research really accurate? Can you really simulate the past? So
what is history? What is knowledge? What are humans?
Yeah, so these are the questions and ideas that I sort of for the genesis of the episode. I kind of want to start with Bridget because she actually had to answer all these questions herself fairly recently when she was prepping for her Samurai Fate games that were excellent. And I loved playing them, but I just wanted for you what kind of issues you wrestled with, what was sort of at the forefront of your mind.
Well, okay, so the thing that I wanted to do is I was like, all right, well, it would be cool if there was a game that you could play just anything with samurai and swords, because I kind of like the idea the samurai sword fight aesthetic. I've watched a few Chanbara films and things like that, and so I'm that's fun. That could be fun to play with friends. So what is the best? I Googled what is the best feudal Japan role-playing game, and I ended up with Sengoku, which I don't know if you've cracked that book open, but it's 400 pages, and 300 of those is setting research, times and clocks and titles of address and manners, tea ceremony. It's cool stuff, but it's oh my gosh, that's so overwhelming. How do I break that down for people to
It's a big buy.
how do I make that fun for people who have like never like read it before?
Yeah.
You know? 'Cause
Yeah, I look like I was just saying, like there are GMs and people who write further out than Glancy. I think Sengoku was sort of an example of that. But yeah, please continue.
So definitely the first thing I said is I didn't want to do like an exact simulation because like that would require a lot of work on my part, and that would require a lot of work on players' part, because like I feel like if you want to make something simulation-y, that's fun, but that needs to be something that your group wants to invest in. So the things that we decided to focus on were deliberate things for building setting, or like kind of building that mood. We talk a lot about what side people put swords on, the posture of samurai walking down roads to indicate aggression, like things that like actually happen. But like for me, it was like focusing on a level of detail that would serve drama, and not so much be purely simulationist. Because like when you're so detached from the source culture and you're so detached from even the time zone, like how can you really be simulationist?
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, I would imagine if you're piling on like your sort of verisimilitude detail, just piling it on and on, eventually it's going to get to a point where it's interrupting or preventing play from happening.
Well, and then the other thing is, like, if you're going to pick a culture that is so far outside of your own, like, you want to be respectful of the source material. So anything that's like during a war is obviously immediately interesting because there's like chaos and conflict, but also like you have to remember that like real people lived through those wars, so and died in them. So being respectful of the events that happened, as well as just people of the time, like times and culture, is definitely a big deal. I think that's one of the reasons like why we went with like a vaguely fantasy version of things, just to kind of avoid some pit traps in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's a whole other issue. Like, I mean, the French this Call of Cthulhu scenario obviously adds the Cthulhu mythos to the French Revolution, and I think it handles it well because it's happening, but it's not what I have seen in the past.
It's not making it to where Cthulhu is the one cutting off people's heads, like it's not caused by the mythos.
Yeah, it's not Haster or Nyarlathotep who's really behind it. You know, Robespierre is not an avatar. It's still a human. It's just hiding in the background, and so that that's certainly a part. You have to be respectful of the source material regardless of year, even if it's 1,000 years back, because I mean history matters, and you can't just kind of simplify. I mean, the whole point of the history is add a bit of complexity and sort of something to make it more gripping, because what I found interesting in the samurai game was things like what side the sword was on, what stance was it on, because it turns it from like a not generic, oh, we're swordsmen fighting in the woods, to like this is like it has more signification to me. More.
It prevents it from being a brawler where you're dressed as samurai.
Yeah.
Well, and it captures kind of like the mode of communication like for that culture without like commenting, like making like a judgment on it. So like definitely like in Asian culture, like Asian cultures, sorry, in general, I don't want to paint Asia as a homogenous culture, but like especially in Japanese, like there's a lot of like talking around a thing, and there's a lot of being very politic about things. So that's something that like I wanted to convey, but then like we were saying, like these examples were definitely all for drama, where like if you did it wrong, it would be it would get you into trouble, and that also plays into like famous Japanese stories. Like it's not something that was coming out of nowhere, because one of like the best known stories that I'm sure everyone has heard of is the Chushingara, or the 47 Ronin, which is like an entirely this massive conflict that takes place over about a year, where 47 soldiers get revenge for their disgraced lord, and that happens because of one very small moment where their lord had had done that kind of faux pas that he was like kind of tricked into doing. So it didn't come from nowhere. Like there was precedent, like we had a model for it. And that's like, if you're going to do that kind of thing for your game, like that's something I would like look for, is things that might model what your campaign wants to do, so that when you have people reacting to things, like it can be authentic and it can be respectful.
I think that's an interesting idea, is like, think of the kind of story you want to tell and then find the bit of history that sort of goes along with that.
Making it sort of thematically complementary. Yeah,
because usually it's the other way around, right? Obviously, it's like, oh, this thing of history is really cool. Let's make a game out of it. But I think, for GMs, regardless of, I think every GM sort of works better when it's a type of story that really grips them, because when you're really interested in the resolution of the story, like, your players will pick up on it. If you're really into, stories about honor and sacrifice, like, this is the kind of story for you. But if you're more like, I love Machiavellian politics and like intrigue and backstabbing and like people being utterly ambitious and ruthless, well, maybe you should actually look at Machiavelli, like, for example, and the whole city states of Italy of the era. So like, So anyways, Thad, you were saying?
Oh no, I was just saying I think that one of the things that, especially as I listened to the Reign of Terror and I haven't finished Bridget's Fate games. I've listened to I just listened to the first one, but then I got distracted because she kept running Shadowrun, and that is my jam. But but I think the thing that makes those games really pop is that thematic connection. Like, I think it's what prevents it from just being like, in the way that you can take Call of Duty and put it in any war that has guns, and the war around it doesn't matter. It's just what's happening around the gunfire, and without that kind of thematic connection, then I think that to me is the sort of what to avoid, is just to have it be wearing costumes while doing something completely unrelated. Like, if you're really going to do a historical game like that to me, it's an opportunity to look for those kinds of themes.
Yeah. You don't want a theme park. You don't want Westworld or, Samurai.
Yeah, exactly.
I want Westworld, but for different reasons.
Yeah. I mean, Westworld is a science fiction. Yeah. Like the act. Yeah. So
one of the things that I saw that I thought, because since we're talking about Call of Cthulhu, one of the things that was like really respectful of like history and like wars and things like that was actually Eternal Darkness. Because at one point in time, like the game takes place during like World War I, World War II, and like the evil like extra dimensional creatures that are trying to destroy everything, like they don't cause World War II. It's just like, it's finally the ultimate cover, because like with every nation at war and like bloodshed being a daily thing, we can just kill and sacrifice people by the dozens and no one will get suspicious because bodies are piling up everywhere.
Like I always prefer that choice. Like, to me, one of the worst choices you can make in any kind of like transposing supernatural or science fiction bullshit onto history is to make it was actually the lizard people all along that caused this. It's not man's inhumanity to man. No, it's humans are blameless. It's the monster's fault. Nah, piss off.
No.
I think it's okay if you want, as long as you like illustrate people that are bad as like being bad. Like if you want to like, because like Mecha Hitler is definitely a thing.
Yeah. I mean, right? I can be a bit of a hypocrite in this, because if you do it well, I think you can get away with doing that.
I think maybe the good dividing line would be like, if you saying this evil supernatural thing is responsible for the actions of an individual, the first example is actually coming in my head is the Sean Beanie clan, or like, that, which is not an individual, but a small group of a family who were all supposedly cannibals and murderers and bandits. Like saying that they were, vampires or ogres or something like that is, I think, more potential for a story, but like saying that like an institution or government, an entire, like something with that sort of foundation is responsible for the evil. That's like, you're sort of also drifting into like conspiracy theories, which are really harmful to, real people. So like individuals, not institutions, I would say would be the dividing line, at least for me. I don't know, Bridget. You were saying?
No, that's definitely something I can agree with. Like, because like if you want to say that like World War II was the direct result of like evil aliens or something instead of like the geopolitical and social factors of the time, like,
And the
I
conscious
think,
decisions of the people who were.
yeah, I think you're setting yourself up for veering into harmful territory, especially like the wider your game group grows. Like it's much more likely that you're going to run into a situation where you make someone at the table uncomfortable.
One other issue that and sort of related to that is like as a GM, you kind of like you know we already mentioned earlier, like you have to know what your players want and sort of like go into that and not kind of like if they want to go to the left, not for you to do a 180 and be like, no, fuck you, I want to do this. But like on the other hand, so there's that catering to your players' wants, but there's also like the other side where like maybe you want to not veer them 180 degrees away, but kind of steer them a little outside of their comfort zone, or like sort of like, I mean, in Adam's Guide Glancy's games, I'm not a World War I expert, but I was educated by these games, and I was outside of my wheelhouse, and I appreciated that, just learning exactly how horrible it was to fight in the, Alps in World War I and how utterly absurd it was, made the game more memorable to me. So like, what is the role between like, if your players all know about like history period Y or whatever, catering to that versus like, here, I'm going to guide you and show you and educate you about this, to a degree. I don't know, like how far do you go? And again, this is going back in the whole thing about like how much detail do you put in a game? But
yeah, I think I don't know. I think a lot of that is that the opportunities that we have, especially being people from America who really don't know that much about history unless we like went outside of our education system to learn about it.
Yeah.
Just the amount of history that I've learned from reading fiction sometimes is amazing in comparison to what I learned in actual school.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a weird tangent. But no, I think that's a good example of why this kind of historical game can be really valuable. I think it's an opportunity to sort of like share in peeking outside of like the three periods in history that we are generally familiar with. Yeah. Like now World War II and the American Revolution. Wait, there was a Civil War? No, we don't talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, Bridget, you were doing some of that in the Samurai game, because I mean, I think everybody in those games has, got some contact through, watching samurai movies and things of that nature, but like not actually, you actually have a background in that. You were actually studying that in an actual, formally, not just, yeah.
Yeah, you can see things that appeal to me specifically in different things. There is like a very brief cameo by the person that eventually goes on to do the first like kabuki theater. Well, at least kabuki dancing. I don't know that I would necessarily call it theater at that point. But listen, you want to be here for another half hour? I'll explain everything to you.
I would love that. Let's just stop and listen to Bridget tell us about kabuki. Can we do that? Can we?
But then the other thing is like you can always work in little vignettes and different things. Like the Rakugo opening. That was fun.
Oh, was that the festival? Or is that, which one was that?
No. I'm talking about the Halloween.
Oh,
the Shadowrun one.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think maybe like as a GM, there's sort of like, I think you do need to push them a little outside. And like, I mean, I've heard of people like, oh, it's a group of, English professors and history professors who all play Pendragon, and they're all experts in Arthurian, legend. Well, okay, that
sounds like that would be torturous.
That would be. I do know like the game Ars Magica, which is like that's actually farther than Glancy in terms of historical research, but about medieval magic and alchemy, was written by actual, history doctorates who are just like, this D&D is foolish. I want a real magic system based on humors and,
Yes,
Yeah.
you must actually bleed yourself at the table.
I mean,
Well, I
so.
think one thing you can do is like you don't want to theme park it. Like you don't want just like things to like happen. But I think it is useful if there's like a very dramatic event that happens, like a very big event that happens, like it can be fun to have a story that takes place during that event to like show people like what it was kind of like for people on the streets like during that time. And one thing I can think of is if you wanted to, just in like historical Japan, if you wanted to do a game during like one of the times that the imperial palace was set on fire, like that would be extremely interesting, because that's like something that can happen like regardless of what's going on like with your players, but like you can definitely communicate that insistence of like, like politics were really in upheaval. Like it was very scary for people to be alive during this time. And if you're in a densely packed city made of wood and there's a big fire, like that's kind of a bad time. Like
the existential terror of fire before firefighting is something I don't think we get enough of.
Yeah, there's a lot of like good like moments that you can build around it. So it stops becoming a theme park, because you like really get into the emotional details and like the historical details where like this is what it's like, this is what people were feeling.
God, I do know. Well, let me see if I remember this right. I think I read something about how the firefighting groups in Tokyo in that time would have like occasionally like get into fist fights over who could put out and there were more like gangs running protection rackets. Am I remembering that right, or was there sort of a degree of criminality or hoodlumism? I
feel like that would be a regional thing.
Well, it's specific to Tokyo, like it would have been
specific to Edo. But like definitely like firefighting was like a big deal profession, like simply because like fires were so damaging both economically and just like in terms of like casualties. Like fire bad.
Fire is bad.
So like a lot of the firefighting in that period like was not about like using water to douse things. Like you had people who had a tool that did multiple things. Like it was a ladder, but it was also like essentially like a big crowbar. Like the goal was to take apart houses next to the ones on fire so that it had nothing to burn onto.
Oh, wow.
So, like very quickly dismantle an entire structure. And you have people like hooking various poles together to make a ladder, and so there's like somebody precariously balanced on the top of it trying to pull down structures. So that's a cool job in and of itself. Just like
I'm
how
already
dramatic that
riveted
scene
by
is.
this.
Yeah, you could do a whole game about like Tokyo firefighters. It would probably be a really sick drama, honestly.
It would actually sounds like a really good game.
But that's the kind of thing you want to dig into when you like want to paint a picture of a historical era. Is like, what is the cool shit that was like? Because you don't need to invent things. Just like look at all the cool shit that was already happening and research that.
So
I feel like a lot of go ahead.
So I guess the question is like maybe we should also talk about like how to get these kind of ideas, like where like, because I know a lot of people may be intimidated by historical research because like you get one academic book and they can be fairly dense.
Never read a whole academic book. That's just a trap.
Well, exactly, but not everybody knows that. You get a book. This is the history of blah blah blah, and then you just read it up, and it's just dozens of footnotes and an academic style of text is not very approachable for.
And then someone finds you dead in your chair, just eviscerated by a book.
Sorry.
Absolutely read academic textbooks for the footnotes, because lots of times you will be seeing an ideological war happening in the footnotes where you can tell that people are trying to be professional, where they're like, in this article that I will name, the people in it get it completely wrong and they're terrible, and I'm talking about you, George. Like,
basically subtweeting was invented in like academic footnotes and marginalia.
Yeah, forever ago. But like one of the things, if you want to have like a low impact way of investigating a culture, and like trying to like piece out cool things, one of the things I would do is I would go to ghost stories. And there's two reasons here. One, you get ghost stories, which ghost stories are inherently cool.
Yeah.
You get to learn about all kinds of cool monsters. You get to learn about that will oftentimes segue into different like fairy tales, which will be very illustrative of culture, but also like ghost stories are stories that get told for a reason. Like I'm sure that you got told like the very like prototypical versions of them, like whenever your parents didn't want you to do something, like if you don't brush your teeth, the boogeyman will get you. Like it's not about the story is not about the boogeyman. It's about the behavior that you're supposed to be emulating, which is like you need to brush your teeth. And so like when you look at ghost stories, there's a real potential to see what a culture values and what the proper like modes of behavior are in that culture. So like it'll be really illuminating while you essentially just read like children's fiction. Two stories that I want to bring up specifically for Japan is Kuchisake Onna, which is this woman who will accost you on the street and ask if you think she's pretty. And if you say yes, her mouth will slit way back and open up into this very monstrous mouth, and she'll ask you again. And regardless if you say yes or no, she'll devour you. But there are so many. So
never compliment anyone.
No, there are so many ways to get past this, though. If you ask her any question, she'll get confused and you can leave. Or you can say that, I'm sorry, I have somewhere to be, and then she'll like apologize and like let you go.
Oh my God, so that's amazing.
It's kind of like it's a cool ghost story on the face of it, and then she's also like a cool monster, like she's like a woman with this like massive like fanged mouth, but it also kind of gives you a script for what to do with actions in public. Like it's not good to like just stop people for things. And if you want to get out of something, like there are polite ways to end conversation, but it's also kind of like it's kind of like a bigger social commentary in that like the value of woman isn't like whether or not she's pretty. It's like the value is more in how you interact with other people, and so like,
whether or not she can eat you.
Yeah.
And then the other one I want to talk about is a much more minor ghost, Beto Beto, which it's literally just noises that a sandal makes. It's like when you're walking alone at night and you hear the noise of like sandals behind you that are like slowly catching up to you. Like that's literally all the ghost does. And the way you get it to go away, like to stop bothering you, is you step to the side and you say, after you, Beta Beta-san, and then the ghost will walk off. So like that like kind of emphasizes like deference and like politeness, which is definitely like a cultural value, but you still get a cute anecdote. Like you get this like interesting ghost story that you can use whenever you feel like in your campaign for like flavor. So like definitely ghost stories is what I would delve into.
Yeah.
And I think one of those, I think following up on that, it's important to look into like how many little ghost stories and things like that, not just from other cultures, but hell, from our own cultures that don't really get any play. Like I have all sorts of books about American folklore that have just tons of bonkers stuff. I don't know if they are I'm not sure if they tell me as much like thematically interesting things about American culture, because a lot of them do seem like somebody just ate the mushrooms they found and then told other people about what happened. But I think those are like ghost stories. It like for the first thing that I think of when you're talking about that, Bridget, was actually the movie Pan's Labyrinth, because that kind of like a Pan's Labyrinth style game of like taking a period of history that is not as well known, at least to us, and also blending in folklore essentially, can make a very unique and evocative setting, and you can use this to talk about a lot of different things. If you're doing a Pan's Labyrinth style game, you could run any number of systems, from Cthulhu to Little Fears to monsters and other childish things, and come up with a lot of great ideas. I mean, in the West, like ghost stories, tend to be like so and so was murdered here. And when we have the hitchhiking ghosts and haunted houses and
haunted houses have their own they do like illustrate things about like American culture. Like when you go into a house and it's haunted and you're worried about living there, like the story isn't really about a ghost in a house. The story is about how you just invested literally all of your money into a location that you are now tied to. So that like speaks a lot about like kind of like the uncertainty of like property and like I guess I want to say the American dream in America.
That's a good point.
And then the other thing,
American dream.
yeah, and then the other thing that steps out to me is Stephen King's It, which is a ghost story about a murderous clown, but like at the same time, like it's less about like the evil that is the clown and more like everyday evils that people just ignore and turn a blind eye to, and so like are allowed to like fester and rot in the heart of small towns because no one wants to address them.
Yeah, I mean, and that speaks to the American experience of like we idealize small town life. It's like Mayberry or something like that, but it's really just as as opposed to the big city, which is film noir and corrupt and evil, and it dehumanizes you. But small towns have just as much evil as big cities, and that's a. So anyways, to our larger point, ghost stories, folklore, that kind of thing are really, that's a really good starting point for researching an era. So maybe look up, if you're about history period X, look up its ghost stories. That's actually a really good idea. I had not considered that.
I think it's also a good way of avoiding, especially for things like Call of Cthulhu, where people know, like a significant percentage of players know what any of the possible monsters is going to be.
Oh yeah.
And so being able to inject, something that is just like something based on a strange ghost story from a particular period or region, I think is a good way of getting around that.
I know Ethan from the Technical Difficulties has done his whole Cthulhu Civil War scenario. Now that I think about it, in a similar vein, now I kind of wish I'd invited him too, so we get his perspective. But that'll be a future podcast. Thad, do you have any other ideas for like not going full? I'm going to write a thesis on this subject period, but Well,
I mean, honestly, speaking of people we know making games, there's this. It's by Habanon Games. I've only ever seen that. But Caleb's No Security settings. Using the depression. I feel like a lot of his ethos behind that was also that same sort of avoiding the ways that Call of Cthulhu has been sort of worn out, like it's more overused areas, and then sort of choosing a thematically appropriate era to build up from.
You don't need to know too much about the Great Depression in order to play and enjoy, but you do learn something about that because he talks about the Hoovervilles or the whole mountain climbing fad to build up national morale. For me, one thing. One approach is obviously just going on the internet and researching maybe long form articles. If you find something like, the New Yorker or the Atlantic about your given history topic, you can usually find like research, they kind of there's different levels of coverage, and like, academic, stuff is at maybe at the very top, but you can go one or two downs and find things in the sort of popular press, books that kind of summarize the academic works.
I mean, even just historical novels can get you a lot of good day-to-day information. I mean, depending on the author, some people are full of shit.
Shout out to local libraries. Like, if you go in and talk to your librarian, like, you're like, hey, I'm interested in learning about this culture, but like, I don't know where to start, but I'm vaguely interested in these things. Like, your local library, even if it's not their like field, like they'll have some ideas on where to start you with digestible material. So definitely use that resource.
That's a good one. Certainly I've looked at Goodreads and Amazon, just browsing books and like reading reviews of certain topics just to sort of get an idea of what's there.
I mean, my go-to research method, if it's something I'm pretty in the dark on, is to go to Wikipedia, scroll down to the bottom, and see like what the sources are that the article was pulled from, and that can often point you towards a lot of good just basic texts.
I mean, like there are books like I read one on when the last days of the Inca, which is about the fall of the Incan Empire. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it's a pretty, it's very approachable. And it's a very easy thing, and I feel like there's books like that covering a ton of different topics. And there's a lot of historical books about given subject matter that I found very interesting. Like I just picked up one called Buzz, which is the history of alcohol and caffeine.
Ooh.
So you can get a lot of ideas about like talking about, hey, when did coffee become popular and what were the ramifications in society? And
everything became better.
And alcohol, obviously, we've had a long history with that. So,
oh yes, I have my own pet theories about why alcohol developed independently in so many cultures, and it's because in every human culture that made alcohol, somebody looked at somebody else and said, "Oh, this smells awful. Try it."
So yeah, but if you don't want to do that, yeah, actually, librarians, I mean, they're paid to find things. I mean, that's their specialty is figuring out how to get information to people, and they're an excellent resource.
Librarians, definitely, they're the heroes.
Yeah. So once you get some material to research, thinking of a different angle about it, approaching it not from like the most, I think the most compelling games are the ones that look at it from a new perspective, because I think we were all suddenly energized and jazzed by the idea of being like an Edo firefighter ripping down buildings. I want that more than I want almost anything now. So we could also talk about like what kind of, are there any games that you want to like? What are some of the historical eras and settings that have interest you recently? Bridget, do you have any that you?
Mexico, right around the turn of like 1900, like 1800s to 1900. Because there was so much going on in that time. There was this big clash of like many different cultures. So like people like say all the time, like, it's totally feasible to have a samurai and like a Chinese pirate and like a Mexico warrior and like all these different characters like in the same party, like in history, like just in Mexico in that time, or South China Sea at that time. So that's definitely like something I would want to research. The cultures in the area like are cool. The climate is much different from like where I live. I'm like in the middle of a rainforest, so like going down into some place that's drier or hillier, or even like a more, I don't know, south of the equator. Once you get down into South America, anyway, that like blending of like things that you think of as very different things, like you kind of think as like Japan and ancient China and all these things as like being separate, but like there's this big cultural overlap that would be interesting to deal with.
I think I know what you're talking about in terms of the that post on Tumblr.
You've read that Tumblr post.
Yes, I have. I'm trying to find it right now while I'm looking for it, because I want to read that, because again, it's a very gripping idea. Of the idea, it wasn't the 1800s, it was like the 1500s. It was like 10. Well, the 15.
No, it's like turn of the century. Like you could have like a gunslinger, and you could have a samurai.
And there's actually another one.
Chinese pirate. Yeah.
They said that there was a fall of the within 10 years of the fall of the Aztecs, there was a Chinatown in Mexico. And there were samurais there working as mercenaries. And so so you could have a pirate and samurai in the same area. You could also have like a fallen Aztec warrior and a samurai. And
why isn't every movie set there?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Oh God, let me see. Let me keep looking. Thad, do you have any historical?
I don't know. I mean, mine's the thing that sort of popped out at me most recently as I was reading Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, because I am postmodern trash, and it opens at the Columbian exhibition in Chicago in 1893, and just the descriptions of that, I was like, man, you could set a hell of a game there, especially considering you also have other like horrible shit going on in the background at the time. Like, I don't know, it's just the way that it was described. It was just this spectacular mashup of not only all this like great fancy like impress the tourist stuff, but also a lot of like labor struggles going on in the background, and it was this great juxtaposition of those sort of things. And I was like, you could have a really good game in that tension somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. So I found the post. Fun fact, I'm gonna totally mispronounce this. The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, fell in 1521.
Close enough.
Yeah, from 1603 onward, large numbers of honest-to-God Japanese samurai came to Mexico from Japan to work as guardsmen and mercenaries. Ergo, it would be 100% historically accurate to write a story starring a quartet consisting of a child or grandchild of an Aztec nobleman, an escaped African slave, a Spanish Jew fleeing the Inquisition, and a katana-wielding samurai in colonial Mexico. And a whole bunch of Chinese characters, because Mexico City had a Chinatown within 10 years of within the fall of the Aztec Empire. So
yeah, that's
that's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
That's right around when Tokugawa was consolidating power. So like, with no more civil war in Japan, like the warrior class needs to get paid somehow.
Yeah, warriors got a war.
So,
but yeah, also again, like 1800s going into 1900s, because that was like still pre-Meiji Restoration, so like samurai are still around. Like, they're not that same kind of like feudal warrior, but like people running around with swords, definitely still a thing. You've got Wild West happening around the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
all kinds of cool
you could have the
things.
samurai, the cowboy, and a pirate, or a very old pirate, because that wasn't too far off from the age of the golden age of sail. So if you'd had
honestly, it takes surprisingly little digging to find out how poorly served we've been by like movie versions of the Old West or of whatever. Like, so much more stuff you could have been pulling from.
Yeah. One of my favorite. There's also things like Fordlandia, which is Ford's, a failed rubber plantation / American suburban town in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest in the jungle. Like, he mowed lawns and like Midwest style houses that were not adapted to the climate at all, obviously. And because he just wanted that whole vertical integration, so he wanted his own source of rubber. So he's like, I'll just build a Detroit suburb in the Amazon. That makes sense. And
wow.
That's what you want to avoid when researching history. Like, don't be Ford. Don't be Ford, everybody.
Don't be Ford. Don't blatantly insert.
But I mean, you can use Ford to show how dumb that idea is.
Yeah, you can use Ford. Just don't be Ford. Like, don't try and build a Detroit suburb in the Amazon.
All right, that's and yeah. I could see that. Yeah, that's the other thing is, of course, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate for talking about this kind of stuff, because obviously history, different mores, different morals, different attitudes towards a lot of things. So there's I don't know if we talked about this before on the show, but there's a common thing in RPGs now called the X card, which is the idea that if somebody has something they don't want to talk about in the game or address, if they want to do it before the game, they talk about it. But if something comes up during the middle of the game, they can tap like an index card with an X on it to kind of like let everyone know that they're not comfortable with that. I'll link to a post about this. I think we've talked about this before. I'm not 100% sure, but sorry, Bridget. Yeah, sorry.
Definitely, I think that's going to be useful, because there's a lot of things in history that are useful for like simulating things, but I don't know that you want to go 1-to-1 with like ethnically motivated conflict. Is that how I want to say that? Like, you definitely like I would shy very hard away from anything that could be considered a slur. Because like, especially if you're going to record it for a podcast, you don't want a listener internationally to go.
Yeah,
be
I
like,
mean, it's
I
bad
can't
enough
believe they
hearing
just
the
said that.
RPPR cast try and use French accents, but like taking it up the next level is.
No, like you want to be respectful. The way I always, or at least like what I try to do is, it's okay to tell stories set in these various places, like to tell a story that's set in another culture, but you don't want to tell stories about what it means to be part of that culture unless that's like your culture. So like for me, like I don't want to tell stories about like what it is to be Japanese, because that is a conversation that I do not have a seat at a table at.
Right.
No, that's a very good point. Another thing for me also is, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, we need accuracy in this game or whatever. And that's often brought up. Yeah, exactly. In like, well, everyone in the past was
no one can fire a gun without doing this calculus.
Well, historical accuracy in more that all the characters are men and none of them have anything other than white pigmentation.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. So. One, like obviously, like I've been pretty relaxed in terms of, I prefer games that are more relaxed in terms of like if someone wants to play, a woman or a person of color in a game, even if they like we first talk about what kind of issues they want to address with that, and if they want it to be like I want to play, a woman in this game, and I don't want to deal with like the insane racism or sexism of the Victorian era or whatever. I'm like, all right, that's fine. We don't have to address that because not every game has to be about everything. Like, but if we do, like, especially if it's a darker game, then like we'll address it. But again, yeah, no slurs, and that kind of thing. But like, also what irritates me about those accuracy people is that, the past was not nearly as white as they think it is. There were not, like women were doing things back then too. Like it's a lot more complex than you think it is. So yeah, don't use accuracy as a justification for being a shitty person.
Well, I think the main thing is I think the main thing is to try and cultivate an awareness of where one's idea of historical accuracy comes from, because most of us, unless we've gone out of our way to not be this way, our idea of historical accuracy comes from movies and television.
Yeah.
And that's the same as not having an idea of historical accuracy.
Well, and if you're going to rely on, I'm sorry to shit on an entire branch of academia, but I'm going to do it anyway. If you're going to use anthropology as your source, remember that like lots of anthropologists are like people in the UK, people in America, like talking about civilizations that are like not their own. So like there is a huge disconnect from the people who are studying it versus like the people who actually have lived experiences.
Yeah, it gives you a much better idea of how to deal with it if you imagine them wearing pith helmets and monocles while they're talking.
Yeah, like like just consider the construction of the pyramids. Like how much of like the actual like technical diagrams did people go, oh, this is purely for symbolic reasoning and things like that, when it's like actually has like technical meaning that makes sense. Like, there's lots of things where people are like, wow, this man never had a wife and he never had any children, but he sure was best buds with this guy that he got married or that he died with and is
yes, they're good friends.
They were buried next to each other. That's how much of
they were the goodest of friends.
Every perspective is by flawed in some way. Like there's no like omniscient, perfect, neutral observer. And like, you bring up the construction of the pyramids, for example, like in popular culture, it's like, oh, slaves were forced to do it. And it's like, no, they weren't. Like it was way more complex than that. Like there was a whole, they weren't slaves. It was just the thing to do. And like you gotta get food somehow. Well, I mean, it wasn't even food. Like it was something to do when they weren't harvesting them, when they were it was the off season. And Like
Egypt's another good one that we think we know about and just hard don't.
Yeah, and I mean Egypt. Well, you can't even talk about like which era. I mean, it's literally thousands of years of history.
That's I think that to me is sort of the just in terms of historical perspective, one of the reasons why World War II is something we go back to endlessly in popular culture and in a lot of games. Is because it irrevocably shaped our idea of what a nation is. And like even going just a little bit back from that, we're just lost. It's sad.
Yeah, that's you bring up World War II and I think a lot of problems is that I think it's worse if your conception is only based on movies and TVs and you aren't willing to do this. For example, there was a lot of when we think of World War II, we think probably a bunch of Americans and Brits fighting the Jerrys overseas or whatever. And guess what? For example, there were a lot of Brazilians who fought as on the side of the UK. There were a lot, it was a world war. And so
what? And even like when do you think your idea, what do you think is the start date for World War II?
Yeah.
Think about
it was in World War I believe.
Yeah. When did World War II start for Japan? If you want to say 1940s, you're dead wrong. World War II for Japan kind of starts around 1917.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, people criticize.
It's the History Channelification of our ideas of history.
Like people criticize the movie Dunkirk because all you saw were a bunch of skinny white guys that all look the same.
There were a lot of Indian soldiers.
There were
Dunkirk. I was reading about that. That was
India was an ally of the UK before they was.
Ally is an interesting term, but we'll move past it. Colonial subjects, fine. All right.
Yeah.
India is still what we would consider one of the democratic powers in Asia.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. So there's tons of complexity in World War II, and which is often sort of ignored for a movie that we saw 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. And that's not really fair. So and again, this, of course, when you're thinking about this, you're like, oh God, now there's so much I never want to do history. Well, no, but I would say one, don't try and I think the best historical RPGs are the ones that focus on very specific, very sort of localized things. I'm going back to the firefighters, and then the Reign of Terror. We were a small group of soldiers. We did two things, and it was not we see all of the French Revolution.
Well, looking through the text of that adventure too. It's pretty pointed as to where you get to go. It's a very tightly framed adventure.
Yeah. And in Bridget's games, it was a very, again, we were samurai on a mission. We go from here to there. It wasn't the grand sweeping epic, which I think is a temptation to do, it's a lot more challenging to do it right. But if you can tell a really cool story, if you just kind of figure out something that, is going to be novel for the players and interesting and engaging.
And I think with a lot of these, again, one of my favorite things about the Reign of Terror book is the bits about the day-to-day lives of people in that period.
Yeah.
Even one of the first books in the bibliography is day-to-day life in revolutionary France. And it's that I feel that would be the best kind of source to start with for these sorts of things.
Yeah. Sorry, Bridget.
If you want to run a really cool World War II game, what I would pitch to you is you're in France and you're playing journalists and your goal is to keep your hometown newspaper alive.
Oh, I like that.
Because there's all kinds of drama, like gunfighting and heists and demolitions and political intrigue that can happen in your small town in France purely because you want to run a newspaper. That would be an interesting campaign to me, honestly.
Yeah, that actually does. That actually one of the games I did play. That one of my best games I just remembered before I started RPPR was someone who ran a game set in World War II, but we were civilians in the Netherlands, or and we just had to deal in occupied Europe, and just like, oh, and we have to have our papers, and we need to forge new papers, and where can I get medicine? And so
that actually reminds me a little bit. There was I think it's just a little free online game by Lucas Pope, the same guy who made Papers, Please, that was called the Republia Times, and it's just you running a newspaper in like a country similar to the Papers, Please setting, where it's just this very like locked down government controlled thing, and you like try and pick what stories to run, and all this is really just an engaging little thing.
And even on RPPR, I'm thinking of the Cold War game where you're playing, I don't remember if it was Gumshoe or Dirty World.
It was Dirty World.
Where you're in
Dangers of Fraternization, the one in Berlin.
Dangers of Fraternization, the one in Berlin, where it's like two different groups trying to solve a crime across international jurisdictions that just happens to cross in Berlin, like that, because that's a really interesting Cold War fallout of World War II game that also in a lot of ways has everything to do about the Cold War, and it also has nothing to do about the Cold War. It's very, very tightly packed, and most of the conflict is just like, how do we bribe the guards to let us go into town? Like, what even counts as a bribe? Like, do I trust the guy that I'm working with as my co-detective? Like, it's very, very interesting. I like the setup for that.
Yeah. And I think the lesson we're getting here is, again, the best role-playing games are the ones that have the greatest stories. And so you have to make and stories are about people, not, it's not about specific people doing specific things. And so by boiling it down to like the very, like, what is this one person doing, or what are this small group of people doing, and then pulling in the relevant historical details to make that, like, here is a situation that's similar but not quite like anything you've seen before, and it's going to be a little different, and it's going to be like you're in a new world, because you aren't, it's going to be a little off balancing, but it's going to be, you're getting sucked into this narrative now, because it's it's not just a murder mystery, it's a really fucked up murder mystery because of these specific reasons. And I think that's the lesson, is to use history, but to never forget it's about the people and the story, and to use the bits of a history that make that the best story. So
yeah. I mean, honestly, I think Bridget brought up Eternal Darkness earlier, and I think it has a lot of really good examples of that, because all of its levels are just like vertical slices of different time periods. And each will have a little bit of setup where it's like, okay, well, yeah, I can see how the church in this era would be a great place for evil to be like hiding and manipulating. And then, now we're in a world war, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're in a giant meat grinder of human misery. All right, yeah. Just like finding those sort of, again, like, to me, it's I see the most like successful, whether it's in video games or whether it's in tabletop games, being like when the theme and what you're trying to do, like what you're trying to explore in the game, mesh, where it's not just arbitrary setting.
Like we were talking about earlier. Think of the story, and then think of what period of history. Maybe think of what kind of activity is. Is it police work? Or is it firefighting? Or is it this? Or is it that? So, sorry, Bridget.
Yeah, because you want to zoom in to the individual level, because ultimately your players are going to be playing individual people, and you want all of the narrative to focus around them. Like, nobody cares about a big fantasy world or whatever with a big villain in it if you never get to fight that villain. So in the same manner, like, if you're going to make a story like about a historical event, like, you only care about the parts that like your players as people could actually experience. So like, if you're going to do it in World War II, like the big bad guys in World War II may or may not be interesting to you depending on what the individuals are. Because like, again, if you're playing like your team of people in France trying to keep a newspaper going, that's going to be very, very different than if, say, like, you're the 5 people that were sent on an extremely complicated undercover mission to attempt to assassinate one of Hitler's generals. Like, that's going to be a very different game, but like, they're both still interesting because you've zoomed into that individual like person level lens.
So that's sort of what we're going for. So I think we've hopefully this gives you everyone some food for thought. If you have other questions or comments, please post them on the site. But when we come back, we'll have shout outs and anecdotes.
Woo!
And we're back, and I know what music we're going to be using for this episode, which, Bridget, you can actually go ahead and talk about since that's your first shout out.
Yeah, big shout out to Jess from Online. The work I want to highlight is she just released an album called Arcology. It's kind of a cyberpunk outrun synthwave like album. So like if you're a big fan,
I like all of those words.
Yeah, if you like vaporwave, if you like synth music, if you like cyberpunk, like definitely Jess's album is something you want to check out. You can listen to it obviously for free because she posted up on Bandcamp. But if you like it, please buy the digital album. You will not regret it, I promise.
Yeah, I did buy it, and I have been using it in a couple of podcasts already. But I'll put another track in so the fans can listen to it, and of course a link to her Bandcamp. And yeah, so my first shout out will actually be a pair of videos that kind of go over similar things. Recently, I never got into Nostalgia Critic or Channel Awesome, but I've been made aware of like this huge controversy about Channel Awesome, and I don't want to comment about that specifically, but I'm going to link to two videos that sort of explain. One is called Fall on Titans from Quinton Reviews, and the other one is Down the Rabbit Hole, which is and that's for Spoonie, Noah Antwiller, who is
the Spoonie one. Yeah. I know you mentioned on Twitter, and then the other one I stumbled across on my own somehow. They are really good.
Yeah, and Spoonie was part of Channel Awesome for some time, but the reason I'm bringing them up because they're just for me as an internet content creator, sort of a cautionary tale of what not to do. A parable of. I don't know. I mean, you can make any kind of comparison. Maybe it's something about egotism, something about, arrogance or mental health issues. Who knows what led to these people? They started releasing videos in 2000, right with the beginning of YouTube, and then Blip.tv, then back to YouTube.
And now look on their works, ye mighty in despair.
Yeah, they became very popular. And they're still kind of popular in some degrees. But they kind of burned a lot of bridges, as you'll see in those videos. And now Spoonie no longer is producing anything, and Channel Awesome, a lot of people have left it. So it's sort of a fascinating bit of we're already having this first wave of internet celebrities that have already risen, fallen, and just totally burned out. Like, I mean, this is kind of like the internet equivalent of VH1 behind the scenes. So I found them pretty interesting, purely as an informative thing. Because again, I was not really aware of them, because I mean, that's the other thing about the internet. You can be an internet celebrity and only a few 100,000 people or a few million people know about you, and almost everyone else won't know nothing about you. So
I spend a lot of time on the internet, an unhealthy amount of time, and there are plenty of people I will hear about, and apparently they've been famous for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really strange.
So pretty fascinating stuff. Thad, what's your first shout out?
My first shout out is to one of my favorite little indie video game makers. She goes by Kitty Horror Show. She I think her biggest game thus far is a game called Anatomy, which is a great little haunted house exploration thing. And she has a lot of other pay what you want games that are they are my preferred aesthetic of interesting little indie games. Most of them are first person exploration games with a very glitchy aesthetic and a lot of like strange horror, and I love it. She's just the best. So I highly recommend if you can pay money for her stuff, I recommend you do so, because she's a small indie content creator and creates a lot of joy through horror.
Yeah, I enjoyed Anatomy. I think you're the one who sort of told me that it was worth buying, and was. So Bridget, you have another shout out.
Yeah. So obviously I opened RPPR with Queer Cyberpunk. My first music shout out is, again, Queer Cyberpunk. So we're just going to keep that theme. I want to give a shout out to Ashton McCallan's In Which We Live and Breathe. Currently it's in like an alpha set of rules, but she has all of that written up. And In Which We Live and Breathe is kind of like Shadowrun, but it really wants to put an emphasis on the punk in cyberpunk. So it's about playing a group of people who are trying to stick it to the man. So like at the end of adventures, I think it's really interesting. You get paid both in things you manage to get your crispy graspers on, but you also get paid in damage you did to corporations. And both of those directly influence your experience. And then the other thing that I like about it is it has a mechanic called tension, which simulates like hotheads and like interpersonal drama within your group. Like it has like a mechanic to simulate like hurting feelings and forgiving each other, or like pettily spiting each other. So if you liked the mechanic from Everybody's Grudge, where like if you do something to be petty to your friends, like you get a point of edge for it, that is a grounding mechanic in Which We Live and Breathe. So definitely give it a shot.
I'm looking at the site now. It looks very cool. You said you were going to be playing that pretty soon, so I'm really interested.
Yeah, I'm gonna be playing a game in it on Sunday. Ash herself is going to be running it, and so I'm going to be playing with a mixed group of Australians and people from the Pacific Northwest. So I'm expecting it to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really like the website for it. Because you got these little interesting little icons on the side that have little gameable bits in it. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So yeah, and speaking of indie sort of RPGs, I want to give a shout out to Damn the Man, Save the Music. It's a RPG basically about Empire Records, the movie, the role-playing game. I mean, it's not specifically, but you're all employees of a Revolution Records, a tiny music store in 1989, and you're just trying to get through another day of work. There's 9 sort of archetypes, like the space case or the flirt or the troubled poet. And you collaboratively as a group come up with the owner or your boss and what that person is like. And then there's a big, and it's about one particular day where a big shot, a former sort of a music star who's fallen on hard times, is coming to do a signing at the store to raise money. And like, you kind of need this to go by smoothly in order to keep paying the rent for the store and everything.
Wow, so it is literally Empire Records.
Yeah, exactly. So it is, and like you have the choice between working on the relationships you have with the other employees, your own personal goal, which could be like confess your true love, or find the lost cat, or
these are excellent goals.
Yeah, excellent goals. There are other ones, but I forgot what they are. They're not as important. And I ran a game of it, and with let's see here, Caleb, Sean, and Aaron, and we all had a blast with it. And I'll have an anecdote about that later on. But it's a really fun game. It takes a little getting. I mean, I would recommend reading it. And the book's not very long, so it doesn't take too long to absorb. But it definitely interesting game design. So yeah, I really like that. Let's see here, Thad, you had another one.
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump from indie video games to professionally made video games, because one of my favorite DS games recently got a re-release, a game called Radiant Historia, which was originally on the DS, just got re-released for the 3DS. Radiant Historia: Perfect Chronology is its new, fancier title, I guess, and it is it's a good old-fashioned 2D RPG where you time travel and try and suss out what's going on in this crazy fantasy war that you're embroiled in, because you start out as a spy, but then in like different timelines, you're on both sides at the same time. But it's great. I like it. It's my kind of bonkers.
That does sound fun. I have one more shout out. Again, a sort of a twofer. I do want to give a shout out to Reign of Terror, the Chaosium book, the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu scenario that I ran, and you can listen to our full run of it. It's a very well put together book and PDF. The book is actually really nice. Full color glossy. They not only have original illustrations, they have historical artwork, drawings and paintings of what it was like, from 1789, 1794. So it's definitely a fun scenario to play in, and they have suggestions for guidelines for expanding it and running like an entire campaign in that era of like other plot lines and and character creation guidelines, so you can create other characters for the era. Stats for muskets and flintlock pistols.
Well, I saw they also had like ways that it ties into Horror on the Orient Express and making it like a big sort of sweeping.
So the Horror of the Orient Express is a campaign that I have not read, but apparently the villain is an immortal, and he's here in this scenario, and like they have suggestions for incorporating in there, and also like here's what to do to make sure the timeline doesn't fuck up. You don't have a paradox in your campaign.
No, fuck it up. Fuck up the timeline.
Well, I mean, I guess it is Cthulhu. That wouldn't be the hardest thing to do. So I also want to talk a little bit about Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. It's definitely an improvement over 6th edition. All stats are now percentils instead of like having to take your stat times 5 or whatever. It's just percentils now. They've also simplified critical successes. There's now like hard and extreme difficulty, I think, which is like a half or a fifth of your skill, and like you're supposed to just do those calculations during character creation, so they're already on your character sheet. They're on the pre-generated characters for Reign of Terror. Reign of Terror had some really excellent characters, by the way, player characters with their own little backstories and personalities, including a woman who is dressing as a man to fight to earn pay as a soldier to support her family. So
yeah, she was pretty good. I also liked the what was the name of the character that Aaron played, who was like just the ugliest person?
Oh, Dubois.
Yeah, he's pretty fun.
He's just like the cantankerous bastards. So 7th edition we'll definitely play some more of. We didn't really try out the auto fire rules because there were no Tommy guns back in 1789. So we'll have to see how that compares to Delta Green's lethality rules. But they did like the system. They did like having the luck as an attribute that you could burn and that's an optional rule. You don't have to do that. So you could really emphasize the horror, but it provides options for making it more pulpy, I guess, to give characters a little bit of narrative control. So, I thought that was fun. So we'll definitely be exploring more of, there's a bunch of, Chaosium's already put out a bunch of scenarios for 7th ed, and there's some really interesting ones. They have some modern day ones. Let's see here. They have some other historical ones. So yeah, what were some of the ones I was looking at? Scenarios. Let's see here. They have Wild West ones. Of course, they have some Carcosa ones, so I'm really tempted to get that. And they have an entire pulp-themed campaign. So, So, they also have a Soviet one. Speaking of history, Cold Harvest, which is apparently playing in Stalin's Russia in the late 1930s. So that would be interesting to try out. Any more shout-outs? I think we got everything.
Nah, that's all mine.
So I do want to mention, the anecdote. So, Damn the Man Save the Music. The players made that their boss was Colonel Spoo, who was a World War I veteran, and he was like 90 years old, and he won the record store in a poker game, and he was kind of going senile and had connections to the mob. So there was a truck in the back of the building, that had basically been stolen, and there was like a trailer attached to it that had a pallet of Faygo, and this is like, wherever this takes place, this is outside the Faygo distribution circuit. So it's like Faygo, the only Faygo you can get in the state, but it's also free Faygo, but it's left out in the trailer in the back, so it's hot Faygo. And it's hot Faygo in more than one way because it's illegal. I mean, it's stolen Faygo, and it's also
hot Faygo.
Yeah. So the players made that became a running joke of the Faygo, because they wouldn't drink the water, and it was free Faygo, so they had to drink it, no matter how gross it tasted.
Of course.
The whole backyard also
The double
area,
hot Fago.
became sort of an important area because one of the troubles that came up was Colonel Spoo went out and was having an episode and just having being crazy. And so the player decided, oh well, we dug out a trench back there that he just instinctively goes to, and so I catch him there. And then the one player did have the personal goal of finding the lost cat, and said, well, of course I just go to the trench and like every cat's just like places to hide, so he's just curled up in the trench along with Colonel Spoo. So but there's
Colonel Spoo and Lieutenant Mittens.
I can't remember what I want to say it was like private first class Darlington or Bigglesworth or something like that. It was a very cute name. But I do remember this whole thing about Hot
naming.
Fago. Cale talks about how he used to work in a music store where one employee literally abandoned their car in the parking lot, and there was like several 2-liter bottles of Mountain Dew in there. And so after a few weeks, everyone just sort of took the hot Mountain Dew out of the car to drink because, again, it was free. And if you work in some sort of music or record store, you will just take whatever's free to drink, apparently, is the lesson I got.
I mean, I believe that is true in all cases.
So it was a pretty short game, but I will definitely want to post that sooner or later because I had a lot of fun with it. I even got to play music because I found some public domain music to use that's punk. So that's something to look forward to. I forgot, didn't either of you have anecdotes aside from... Well, actually, Bridget, you could talk if you want to give a little teaser about a 4-part game you ran recently. This, I guess, could be the time to talk about it.
Yeah, we just did a game about, speaking of my Patreon being magical girl themed, we just did a 4-part campaign that's going to be really, really cool for our
I'm
RPPR.
so jealous of this.
It was Ross, Faye, and Dario, who you may remember from Shadowrun games, played magical girls. And they had a lot of adventures with grappling with what it means to be a girl with superpowers and how you deal with the world ending. So that was it was really fun. There's a lot of really good
I
dramatic
cannot wait
moments.
for this.
Yeah.
And there was definitely not a part where I wondered if it was going to be a 2-episode campaign instead of a 4-episode campain because people started losing limbs to power magical abilities. So yeah, if you ever want to see Ross go, well, this is a strong mechanical ability with no downsides. Like this is going to be the
Wait, did Ross become Aaron?
To be fair, Dario starts it, but once he does it, Ross is like, well, fine, I guess I'll die of everything too.
Well, okay, so in Magical Fury, there is a rule that lets you go basically Super Saiyan on somebody, but there's a downside, but it doesn't happen until the end of the fight, like after you've won, so it's fine. And
so you'll kill yourself winning.
Yeah.
Well, and the downsides are like completely harmless things, like losing your eyesight permanently, or like your arm just becomes eaten by the magic that you use to power your attack. Like just totally normal stuff with absolutely no downsides.
This is amazing already.
But the way to power game that is to keep using it until you have all of them, in which case it can't get any worse. So
you just become
Yeah, if you've lost both of your arms, then when you get paralyzed arm, it no longer matters.
Exactly.
You're invincible.
Exactly. I can't be blind twice. I'm still blind. So that was.
I can't be blind twice. Ross Payton, 2018.
Yeah, no, it's a great game. And we're gonna have some original artwork for it. It's gonna be great. I'm really looking forward to posting it. But yeah, so that's something to look forward to. So that's been RPPR episode 153, History's Mysteries. I'm Russ Payton. Thanks again for listening. And don't forget to back Bridget on Patreon.
Yay!
Bye, everyone.
Bye.